Hello everybody, video number 2 in our series of 22 ELR. Just going through some real basics here on how I get out to shoot, how I would practice or get prepared for a match at range or at distance. And last time we talked about your holding and your position and what this type of discipline is. It's a different discipline than moving and shooting and whatnot. And this time I'm going to talk a little bit about the reality of shooting a long range with a 22. Many people still don't believe you can do that past 200 or 300, but it should not be that hard, and it isn't that hard, and it isn't that hard with an affordable rifle. Now this rifle, there's some money in that, I understand that, but it's basically my CZ455, which is stock 100% minus the spring I changed on the trigger. It's effective out to 500 without a problem. And it's just a stock CZ455, which has now been discontinued. And it has a stock Boyd's, I think, wooden stock on it, not a chassis. But anyway, so what you have to understand is there's a couple different basics here that are very important. The first is, what distance are you shooting? If you don't know what distance you're shooting, then you're basically just completely blind. You're just guessing. So if it's 30 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards, then when you get out to 200 and then 250 and then 300, a lot of stuff begins to happen to the bullet at 300 and a 40 grain standard velocity bullet. So you need to get your distance. So you come up with a rangefinder. There are many rangefinders. This just happens to be a Sig Sauer. I like it. It's very good. It's effective out past 1,000. And I range everything. Because without your range, you don't know where you're shooting unless you've just got a very large target. And we're trying to shoot with 22, maybe 2 MOA, so at 200 yards, that's 4 or 5 inches. 4 inches actually, but let's say 4, 5, or 6 inches depending on your target. You get out to 600, you're trying to shoot a 24 inch, which is actually 4 MOA, because it's, at 600 it'd be 6 inch, 12 inch, and then 24 would be double that. So and the reason you do that is because your bullet is that much more unpredictable. Its effective range is 300 yards. A perfect weather, you might get to 350, 400. That's the realities of a standard velocity 22. So, but you can easily shoot 500 yards. Conditions have to be right. So the first thing is you need to get your distance. What distance are you shooting? Because if you don't know that, it's kind of ridiculous. Now, the second thing is the speed of your bullet. Now I have several chronographs. I have Magneto Speed that I've used a lot. It was very mobile. I actually have an extension that fits on most chassis using an Arca mount, and so that's a very effective, and I've used for I can't even remember how many years. And currently I'm using a Garmin, and I love the Garmin. The new Garmin, or it's not really new, I've had it for, I don't know, quite a while actually. It's just so portable and so small that it's very effective. So that gives you your speed, and there's several other brands. You want to number one, get your distance. If you have a cheaper rangefinder, I recommend getting your distance from the target back to your fixed firing position, and from your fixed firing position to your target. Do it several different ways, and if your rangefinder is very different, say off by 4 or 5 yards depending on where you are, then do an average. Interpolate the data so that you're halfway in the middle. The higher end you get, the more accurate you're going to be. And so that's how I would use a rangefinder. Now my chronograph, I do the same thing. Now in the case of the Garmin, I just leave it out and I just shoot every round, and then I get an average over 40, 50, 60 rounds. In 22, you want as many rounds downrange as you can get for the average. What is your average? What is your standard deviation? What is your extreme spread? These are numbers that I would use when I'm reloading to get more and more accurate. In 22, you can see some high extreme spreads, but again, you're looking for your speed and your distance. If you don't have those two numbers, then you have to basically walk yourself out in range. And so what I would do is I would start at 50 yards, 100 yards, 150, 200, 250, 300, and I would shoot every one of them ranges in the exact same conditions. You can't come out one day with a 13-mile-an-hour tailwind and come out the next day with a 13-mile-an-hour headwind and shoot two different distances. You need to get that data and true your velocity all the way out. And so you would take and you'd say that, and these conditions, today it's 50 degrees, February 8th or something, which is incredible that it's 50. You're going to take your temperature, your density altitude, and let's just say you don't have any of this information, but you're going to take your temperature, you're going to take your elevation, which you should be able to find within some some number on the internet, and you're going to be able to get some data that way. And you're going to put down it's 6 mils at 200, it's 2 mils at 100, or if you sight in at 100, or however your numbers are, they're different per round. And you're going to get an actual true velocity and a true distance. A true ballistics for each distance for your rifle. Now you go out the next time and it's 30 degrees, you do it again. And then you write all that data down. So I write everything down in here. Now I have a Kestrel, which gives me the weather, which gives me my density altitude, which is basically the pressure of the air plus the elevation, and that changes based on the humidity. And so then you use that number to actually I write that number down because I have a Kestrel weather meter with ballistics in it. If you don't have that though, you just walk your gun out, shooting at each 50 yards, and you keep doing that till you get enough data that you can use that data in a match or in your shooting environment, wherever that might be. So here's the idea. We all did math problems in school. You know, Johnny left the bus station at 5 o'clock and he got to New York at 8 p.m. How fast did he drive? You know, the story problems that we all had in math that, like me, I absolutely hated them. Well, here's the shooting analogy. So my bullet leaves my gun at 1 second. Let's just say 1 second. It gets to my target at 3 seconds. And so now I have a range based on the speed that I can back that into. Now you don't have to go to all that advanced math, but that's basically the same idea. But if, as a story problem, if you don't know the distance and you don't know your speed, then you have no idea how to figure out how Johnny gets where he's going. So you need some data. And the best data you have, if you don't have gear like a Magneto Speed or a Garmin or any of the other great brands, and you don't have a Kestrel and you don't have a rangefinder, you got to walk yourself out, because you're building yourself data that's going to say that at 150 my gun shoots this on this day on this weather. And you don't need to have all this fancy gear. You can just walk the gun out. You write all that down and you shoot under different conditions. I don't care if it's snowing one day and sunny the next, you write it all down using the exact same ammo. And then you actually come up with your own ballistics. Now you can plug all that data in mathematically and actually come up with the speed of the bullet. You can come up with your distance. You can use a lot of factors, a lot of math to actually do that. It's all available on the internet if you don't have all the fancy ballistics. But you have to know your speed and you have to know your distance to actually be able to shoot at random distances. If you don't know any of those, you have to build that, and you have to build that chart and build that data and write all that down. I would recommend putting it into a spreadsheet, come up with some averages. So if you shoot at your location 150 and 175, and at the match day it's 165, you're going to take your numbers from 175 and 150 and interpolate the data in between, and you're going to have a pretty accurate number. You match that with a weather day that you have written down, and you actually then use that information to figure out what you need to dial your scope to shoot on match day if you don't have all this fancy information. If you have the information, now you have your speed of your bullet from your this case the Garmin. You use the average. The average is the high and low, it's in the middle. If the more rounds you shoot, the better, stronger that average is. Some are going to be faster, some are going to be slower, and at distance, faster goes over the target, slower, goes under the target. And so you're hoping for the smallest spread of all those numbers that you can possibly find. So what you're looking at is going out, collecting all that data. Even if you have a rangefinder and a chronograph, and you use the same ammunition and you have all the weather data, you still want to go out and test and confirm that that data is accurate. If you don't confirm the data, then you don't know when you go on match day or when it's an important day like shooting, hunting or something, you don't know what you've actually got. And so that's extremely important that you take your data, write it down, keep it all stored. I put everything in spreadsheets. Confirm that what you're using technology-wise actually works. And if it doesn't, then you're still going to go out and manually true your gun, true your ballistics, so you have something that you can rely on. So that's where we're at today. If you don't know how fast Johnny's going, then you have to know how far he's going and when he got there. If you know when he got there, and you know that he has a certain distance, you can figure out how fast he's going. So see, you can think through all of that and actually use mathematics to figure it out. But from a simplistic standpoint, you can go out and shoot 50, 100, 150, preferably 175, 125 on different days, whatever, 200, 225, 250, and you build yourself data charts that you can rely on without having any of this information. Now, if you have this information and you're shooting 250 yards and you've got a 7 or 8 mil hold on your scope or dial on your scope, but then you realize the humidity, you've got some rain, and every day that you shot you had low humidity, you've got a lot more pressure in the air, your bullet's going to be under more drag, and so it's going to shoot low. You've also got then wind factors, which will be what we talk about next. No matter how much data you have and how true you are, wind becomes the deciding factor when you shoot ELR. You can shoot a 1 MOA, which at 50 yards is a half inch. At 100 yards, it's 1 inch. You could shoot half or quarter MOA, the size of a bullet at 100 yards, and shoot them all in the same hole. Most likely you're not going to do that because of dispersion, which is just basically a term that says that I shoot more and more, I'm going to have a wider group that has an average inside that group. That's actually where my gun shoots. But you see guys on the internet that shoot 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 shots all in the same hole, and then they take a picture and put it on the internet like that's their gun. The reality is you need to shoot 50, 100 rounds the exact same hole, throw out the flyers because many of those are going to be you shooting or you going crazy, and come up with an actual data or an actual accuracy of your gun or your round. But when you're shooting into the wind, that number, even if it's a quarter MOA, means that you're going to be shooting better and more accurately at, say, 500 yards. But the reality behind it is just a breath of wind is going to take that and make that 4 or 5 MOA or farther away. So that'll be our next that we're going to talk about, which is basically how wind is going to take your bullet and do all kinds of funky things with it. So, forward forever, backward never. Thank you. Enjoy.